Amazon's coming again, right? It's always something.
I left a message with Josh to come after 1 o'clock. Done here.
All right. Got to give a congratulations to the Freemans on their son-in-law.
Oh yeah.
You know about that.
You know.
Not only is he the Miami Dolphins fan of the year, he's one of the 3 finalists for the NFL fan of the year, and is getting to go to Super Bowl 55.
We get all the recordings.
Yeah.
Jessica
He's going to the Super Bowl.
Yes, Jessica's going with him.
Good. That's great.
They're going to be distanced though, and that's hard to do that.
Yeah.
But, Jill has a plan. She always has a plan.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. It is now 12 o'clock, so welcome, everyone. We only have an hour to play together, so I want to make as best use of the time as possible. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put everybody on mute, and then if you have what to say, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself when you have a comment. This is meant to be a dialogue and not a monologue. And it's great to be with all of you as we get started. So what we're talking about, and this conversation began last week, and it's going to continue into next week, are the overlap of 2 parts of Jewish tradition. One part of Jewish tradition is this big theologic rubric that we have, the rubric of creation, revelation, and redemption. These 3 points in the story of the Jewish people, some of which have already happened, some of which haven't happened yet, and the theologic underpinnings behind framing our worldview in that way, mapped onto the second part of the Jewish tradition we're talking about, which is our daily prayer cycle, right? And we're going to see how not only that, but how these three cosmologic, theologic moments are mapped onto the prayer service, which then reinforces the notion that we have these 3 pieces to our story on a twice daily basis, meaning that the rubric that we're talking about, the prayer rubric, is part of the weekday morning service and the weekday evening service and the Shabbat morning service and the Shabbat evening service and the festival morning service and the festival evening service and the High Holy Day morning service and the High Holy Day evening service. There are in some of the blessings a little bit of changes in additions to what we do, depending on if it's a weekday versus a festival versus a Shabbat versus not. But the reality is those insertions tend to be focusing on the themes of the holidays. The general principle, the general idea, the theme runs all the way through. So, as we get started, we're going to begin, because we will be looking at text again. We'll begin with the blessing for study together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe. You make us holy with your commandments and command us to engage in the study of Torah. Okay, so a review from last week. Our story, the story of the Jewish people, bigger than Moses, bigger than Abraham, bigger than any single generation, the big story. What's the big arc? The universal arc. The arc that goes or includes all of time is the arc from creation to revelation to redemption. Creation, God bringing the universe into being with the word, right? God spoke and things came into being. Pop quiz, what was the first thing God spoke and brought into being? Raise your hand if you think you know. You're all yelling into a... Thank you, Sue. You're all yelling into a muted Zoom. You're all yelling... I see this. If you're going to yell out, you got to unmute yourself, right? Light, right? Yeah, he or. God said, let there be light, and there was light. And through the power of speech, God created everything. God created light. God created the earth, God created the water, God separated, God made, all the stuff. And that happened last week. We'll call it last week, sure. Or a while ago, something like that. Right now, it happened obviously a long, long time ago. The next moment in the big story is the moment of revelation. God again speaking, God sharing God's wisdom with us at Sinai and later. And as I think about this again, also maybe before as well. Because the story of prophecy, the story of God speaking to humanity and sharing of God's wisdom, the focal point of that certainly was at Mount Sinai and God speaking to Moses. But God spoke to Adam and Eve as well. And God spoke to Noah as well. And God spoke to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and their partners. And so there were moments of prophecy earlier than Sinai. Another pop quiz, and this time unmute yourself to answer. What was the first command that was given?
Be fruitful and multiply.
True or vu, exactly. Be fruitful and multiply. 2 gold stars for Sue today. Right? Now I don't get to call on you for the rest of the day because you've taken up your allotment, right? God didn't tell that to Moses. God told that to Adam and Eve, right? This is the first thing you're supposed to do. So there was examples of revelation, of prophecy, of God giving instruction, of giving mitzvot before Sinai. We know that prophecy continues after Sinai as well. It continues after the life of Moses. We have all the books of the prophets, and all of that we consider to be revelation as well. We can talk about the oral tradition being given at Sinai, right? Mishnah and Midrash and Talmud and all of that. So when I think of revelation, and those of you who have learned with me in other contexts, I think of it in the way that we think of the word Torah. It's everything. It's the large and most expansive definition. It's not just the 10 commandments at Mount Sinai. It's all of the wisdom that God gave to all of humanity at all the various moments. And collectively, that's what we talk about when we hear the words or hear the word revelation. God revealing to us God's wisdom. Then the last point in the story happens kind of twice. There's a little and there's a big. The little is redemption from Egypt, deliverance, right? Bringing us out of the point when we are in bondage, right? And that word redemption, we also talk about in terms of like when you have to redeem a captive, right? It's a mitzvah. If there are Jews who are held captive somewhere, the community and each individual has a mitzvah upon them to go and try to free them. We redeem the firstborn, pidyon haben, right? We have to redeem the firstborn, our tradition says, from temple service. But then there's this other redemption, the big R redemption, the later redemption. The redemption that we talk about, if you read closely the words of Aleinu, that says, Bayom ha'hu yehiye Adonai echad u'shmo echad, right? On that day, God will be one and God's name will be one. That we will be free, we'll live in a world that is free of illness, free of injury, free of war and famine, all that kind of stuff. That hasn't happened yet. That's what we're building towards. That's what we're working for. That's what our goals are, right? This is when we start talking about the idea of Messiah and Olam Haba, the world to come, all that kind of stuff. That's the sort of past the horizon vision that big R redemption invites us to undertake. Okay. Any questions about these 3 big theologic principles that mark the plot points in the story of the Jewish people? Barbara, if you're trying to unmute yourself, raise your hand so I know, and I can't tell you. See your finger going towards the button. No? Okay. All right. So we're going to move forward then. So last week I also shared with everyone this idea of the Star of Redemption, right? The Star of Redemption is a modern expression and really put to some language this idea that is built upon. The Star of Redemption was put together by Franz Rosenzweig, who was raised as an assimilated, really not participating in Jewish life Jew in Germany. The ideas came to him during World War I, and he at a certain point was very, very close to converting out of Judaism into Christianity. He had kind of an epiphany on Yom Kippur. And so he put together this star of redemption, this star that has 6 points, where he maps out these 3 plot points in Jewish history and also puts 3 kind of, they're not really spatial, right? But these 3 participants in the story. One participant is God, one participant are human beings, and both individually and collectively, and one participant is the universe. And the story that he tells is how he weaves us individually and us, the Jewish people, into relationship with God and into relationship with the universe. And it goes like this. God, I should get the laser pointer out. This will be helpful. God creates the universe. God reveals Torah to human beings. So we have 2 pieces that are emanating from God: creation and revelation, creation of the universe, revelation of wisdom to human beings. What's left is the bottom part. So for us, for Jews, the revelation, Torah writ large, is a blueprint, is an instruction manual or a series of guidances on how to behave and what to do and how to do. And the end result of us doing the things that God tells us to do is meant to be what? Redemption. When we do the things that God told us to do, it will bring about redemption. And when we bring about redemption, it brings the universe and God and human beings into a singularity in the middle. The way that we get back to being close with God, the way that we go back to hearing more from God, the end of the story, the place we're going to, is this idea that through doing the revelation that God gave us, we bring about redemption, and redemption is bringing God into the world, into the universe, or bringing human beings and universe up to God, whatever it is, or they meet somewhere in the middle. But it's this idea of a reunification. And I mentioned last week that idea of trying to get to the future time and place when we have a new and better working relationship with God is not unique to the Jewish people. A lot of faith traditions have a story that has that as a plot point in their story. What makes us different is how we get there, right? We get there through Torah, right? If you're a Christian, and I'm going to mess this up because my understanding of Christian eschatology is not as strong as I wish it would be, but I know that Jesus plays a big role in all of this, right? That the first coming and the second coming are a part of all of that. That's all I'm going to say, because if I say any more, I'm going to be wrong, and I don't like to do that, right? This story also exists in other faith traditions as well that I'm not going to even begin to surmise what that might be. But this is our story. Our story is when we do the revelation, it then brings us in unity with the universe and with the Holy One, and that's what we're going for. So that's how creation, revelation, redemption fit in the story, and what our role in all of that is. So as we discussed last week, we're told in the Mishnah that when we're doing our morning and our evening prayers, around the time of saying the Shema, we say 2 blessings before the Shema in the morning and 1 after it. In the evening, we say 2 before and we say 2 after. What are those blessings? I'm going fast because this is review. Here is the rubric of what the prayer service looks like. The middle you see in both the morning and the evening is the Shema and Ve'ahavta. In the morning, we have Yotzer Or. In the evening, we have Ma'ariv Aravim, which we looked at closely, both of those texts last week. They are about what? They're about creation. The focus primarily of Yotzer Or is, of course, God creating light, but following up with that, God creating light and everything else. And so most of the blessing is a congratulations to God and a gratitude of God for creating. And since we're saying it in the morning, it should make sense that the phenomenon that we're experiencing, the time in which we're saying Yotzer Or, is the light. I didn't mention this last week, but I'm going to raise it out now. Of course, for Jews, there's always the good way to do things and the perfect way to do things, right? So the good way to do things is you say the blessings in the morning. But there is actually a specific moment or a specific time when you're supposed to be saying the morning blessings. And in particular, it's tied to when you're supposed to say the Shema. So does anyone know, according to the tradition, what is the most optimal time to be saying the words of the Shema? Barbara, you got to unmute yourself.
Is it sunrise?
Well, you're not Barbara, Margaret. I called on Barbara.
I'm sorry. I'm not with it today.
Sunrise.
Thank you, Barbara. Yes, Margaret, you're
couldn't
right.
unmute.
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
Yes,
I apologize.
it's okay.
I forgive her.
That's okay. Yes, it's sunrise, right? The idea is the very moment the sun breaks over the horizon is the moment that you're supposed to say the Shema in the morning, right? You'll see certain communities do this. They call this a hashkama minyan, a hashkama, the coming out early in the morning. I know that our friends at Boca Raton Synagogue do this on a monthly basis. They gather at the beach at Palmetto Park Road, and they gather for an early morning minyan to do the sunrise. I've done it before. It's wonderful. If you want to get up that early, it's wonderful. My favorite was doing it, of course, at the top of Masada in Israel. When I was a tour guide with Nifty in Israel, when we got the kids up at 3 o'clock in the morning and dragged them by the collar up the snake path to get to the top of Masada before the sunrise, the payoff was we got to watch the sunrise from the top of Masada, which is a breathtaking experience, to say the least. And so, yes, you're supposed to say the Shema as the sun is rising. So if you're doing Yotzer in that rubric, what's going on around you? Well, what's going on around you in the 5 or 8 minutes before the sun breaks over the horizon is that the sky is filling with light, right? You're beginning to see light getting more and more and more. You're going to begin to see rays of light coming up from over the horizon. Even before the sun itself cracks the horizon, the sky is going to be perceptibly filling with light while you're saying Yotzer, which makes sense because you're saying a blessing, thanking God for making light. In the evening, Ma'ariv Aravim, what is the phenomenon that's going on there? It's the opposite. The sun has gone down, and we typically do Ma'ariv a little bit afterwards, right? So what's happening is we're seeing the light getting, the sky getting perceptibly darker, right? And the conversation in Ma'ariv is all about turning day into night and night into day. And there's some allusions to the larger issues of time, of turning the seasons and all of that, but this idea that the passage of time is an expression of creation itself, right? It's our way to experience the miracle of creation on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, with the rising and setting of the moon, with the cycle of the moons, on an annual basis through the seasons. That's how we experience the beauty. One of the ways we experience the beauty of creation is by having the passage of time and the celestial bodies doing what they do as time passes, continuing to bring into fruition the system that God imagined when God created the universe, with those celestial bodies to do those things at those times.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
What do they do in places where the sun isn't setting, like in Alaska, where you have the midnight sun? And how do they adjust for that?
They asked the Chabad rabbi. No, I'm kidding. No, it's a great question, and it's something that the rabbis of the rabbinic period couldn't have imagined, because there were no Yidden living north of the Arctic Circle back then, or south of the Antarctic Circle for that matter. And so they do something. They have a way, right? They use a time that I think this is when you're supposed to do it. By the way, the same thing happens if you ever travel to Israel on El Al, right? Which is you're traveling through time zones, and at a certain point, they all know this is the time to do it, and so there's a little bit of you just sort of pick a time that was supposed to work and do it that way. That's all I'm going to say about that because I haven't explored the Picayune details, but I think they take the average, right? It's 7:15. Okay, it's time for harvest, right? Whatever it might be. But no, it's a real concern because you can't. And obviously, and this is why I said before, there's the good way to do things, and then there's the optimal way to do things, right? Optimally, you say Shema as the sun is breaking over the horizon. But we know, if you've studied even the beginning of the Mishnah, that the Mishnah gives a very wide range of time when you can say the Shema. You can say the Shema basically till lunchtime. So it's not only tied to a specific moment in time, it's the morning. But here's the best time to do it, right? We are a lot of best, optimal, allowable, not allowable, no credit, forbidden, right? You do Shema late, you get no credit. It's not forbidden, you don't get credit. Then there are things that are forbidden, right? We tend to think of Judaism as being black and white, and really actually there's a black and there's a white and there's a whole series of grays in the middle, right? The very best way to do things is to say the Shema as the sun rises. The wrong thing to do is like to say the Shema wrong, right? Or to double up on words or say it to a different God, right? That would be terrible, God forbid. Chas v'chalila. And in the middle there's a ways you can do it well. The morning, when to do it. The evening, when to do it. Okay. Good. Now we're ready to get started. Now we're ready to jump into today. Because today we're going to talk about the second set of blessings. And just looking at this slide, what are the names of the two blessings, the second blessing before the Shema, in the morning and in the evening? I'm testing your reading capabilities now. Dan, go ahead.
Emet. So Emet B'Yatziv and Emet B'Amuna.
Well, that's next week. That's after. We're going to the second blessing
fine.
before.
All right. So then the Ahava, the love.
Ahava, love. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you, Dan. Ahava means love. Right? We know that. So we have two blessings, both of which have the word Ahava, love, in them. Anyone know what Ahava Rabbah means? What the word Rav. Not Rabbi Rav, but a different kind of Rav. Lorraine, you're yelling at the screen, but we can't hear you because you're not on mute. All right, Lorraine, I can't understand what you're trying to say, so we're gonna go to somebody else. Anybody else want to guess what Rabbah means?
Learning.
Not learning. We'll get to it. I see why you think that, but no. We'll get there. So Rabbah means of great multitude, of great amount, a lot. A lot. When we think about the phrase that comes from Torah of the group of people who left from Egypt with the Israelites, it was an Erev Rav, a mixed Rav, a mixed large group of people, a mixed multitude. Hosanna Rabbah, great stuff going on. Big, good, a lot. Brian.
Toda Rabbah.
Toda Rabbah, good, right? Great thanks, much thanks. Right.
Thank you.
Rabbah means a lot. A lot of love. Good. Ahavat Olam.
Everyone.
Who said everyone?
I did.
Lorraine. So
No,
Olam
everything.
is this, and everything, right? So Olam is this wonderful poetic Hebrew word because it means it's used a lot of different ways, right? So one understanding of the word Olam is the universe. Ha'olam, Melech Ha'olam, ruler of the universe. Le'olam va'ed, forever and ever. Olam is this beautiful word that both transcends and includes time and space. Because we use it in a temporal sense, le'olam va'ed, forever and ever, and in a spatial sense, melech ha'olam, the universe. Now, what do both forever and ever and the universe have in common? Now we're playing Can You Read My Mind?
Infinity.
Yeah, it's infinite. It's boundless. It goes on without limitation. And that is what olam really means. It's an unbounded, unending. So if I asked you, what does ahavat olam mean?
Was love.
Endless love, everlasting love, unbounded love. I'm not going to ask you to discern between ahava rabbah, a great amount of love, and ahavat olam, an unending amount of love, because they really mean the same thing. They're just two different ways to be poetic around all of this. What you'll notice grammatically is that ahava rabbah ends with a hey, ahava rabbah, and ahavat olam ends with a tav. That's grammatical because ahavat olam is a compound word with two nouns. When you have a compound word with two nouns, and the first noun ends with an open hey at the end, it becomes a tav. Ahavat olam. Simchat Torah. It's called a smichut in Hebrew. It's words combined together. It's strictly a grammatical construction. Whereas ahava rabbah is a noun and an adjective. So it keeps, but that's all it means. But they mean essentially the same thing. A lot of love, unending love. Now, before we get into the text, guesses for what a blessing based on Revelation, talking about Revelation, right? This is the prayer about Revelation. What's the connection between love and revelation? I'm not even going to say the right answer if I hear it, just if anyone wants to make a guess.
Love of Torah.
Love of Torah. Good. Other ideas?
The Torah in the sense that it's God's way and God's will and much bigger than just.
Yeah. Good. Remember, I'm not going to respond by saying right or wrong. I'm just taking the answers right now. I can see you sensing wanting me to react. I'm not going to react. I'm just going to collect.
God's love for us is the reason for the revelation.
So Dan says God's love for us is the reason for the revelation. Good. Other ideas?
That love is the revelation.
Ooh, that love is the revelation. Beautiful, Nita. Thank you. Okay. So here we go. Ahavat olam. This is the translation from Mishkan Tefillah, the one that we are familiar with. Everlasting love you offered your people Israel by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, Adonai our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people, Israel. So we see some of what was just said, right? Dan's suggestion that God expresses God's love to us by offering revelation, that's in the first sentence. You offered us love by teaching us Torah. Good. And what do we do with that? We learn. We contemplate. We meditate. Clearly here there is an allusion to some of the pieces in Shema, right? That we're going to be in V'ahavta, that we're going to read shortly. When we lie down, when we rise up. right? We know that's coming. That's the next blessing is Shema Ve'ahavta. We have an allusion to that. And we are rejoicing in Torah forever.
What about acting?
What do you mean, Howard? What do you mean, what about acting?
Don't we have to do something? Simply thinking about it is very nice, and loving the love that we're getting is wonderful. But don't we have to act accordingly?
Okay.
Create a wonderful, as a partner, to create a universe that God would love too. Isn't it our job?
So, do we have to do? Yes, no question about it, right? And I'll remind everybody of that wonderful teaching, I think it's in Pirkei Avot, that asks the question, is studying Torah more important, or is doing good deeds more important?
Oh.
No, there's an answer.
Complement each other.
There's an answer. There's an explicit answer. Margaret, do you know the answer? You're on mute still. Go ahead.
Well, I know we're supposed to say it's about doing, but I think it's really about studying Torah. Because if one is studying Torah and learning, it will automatically transfer in doing, maybe.
That's exactly right. That's exactly the teaching from the Pirkei Avot, that the study of Torah is more important because the study of Torah leads to the doing of good deeds. So, Howard, I'm going to answer your question in two different ways. On the one hand, there is in our worldview this implication, this assumption that the learning of Torah cannot be divorced from the doing of Torah because you cannot help but do once you have learned. However, I would say that the story, creation, revelation, redemption, the train track that it's on from those 3 points, the doing of the teaching is what takes us from revelation to redemption. And we'll see this next week, that the conversation about the doing of Torah comes not in a bracha about revelation, but in the bracha about redemption. So sort of like, yes, but we're not quite there yet in the story as a response to what you said. Now, I'm going to suggest that, I'm going to declare that the blessing Ahavat Olam is more limited in its depth and breadth, intellectually, ideologically, theologically, than Ahava Rabbah, which is a long way of me saying it's shorter, and so there's less in it. But before we move into compare it to Ahava Rabbah, we're going to look at it together and look at it side by side. Why do you think it might be, and this is a little bit of a practical question, why is it that the blessing in the evening is shorter than the blessing in the morning?
We're more tired in the evening. That's a
So
practical.
Anita's tired. She wants to go to bed. Okay.
I think that it's, as the new day is starting, we are given an opportunity to do what God wants us to, and therefore, at night you're thankful, but you're sleeping. During the day, in the morning, you get to do God's will.
Yeah, for sure.
I think
you're. Go ahead, Fran.
I think during the day and in the early morning, they have more sunlight to do things. But once the sun goes down and the temperature changes, they can't see and do as much.
Yeah. So there's this phrase that has become a very common sort of workplace jargon phrase, especially in the world of working on Zoom, which is the phrase hard stop. I've got a hard stop at 1:00. Right? Which is a nice way of me saying at 1:00, I'm logging off of this call in the middle of a sentence if I have to, because I have something else that I need to do that because sometimes you have a meeting and you have the meeting and it goes on a little longer and you sit and talk in the hallway and you have the meeting after the meeting and the conversation in the parking lot and all that kind of stuff. And hard stop is the opposite of that. Hard stop is I'm signing off because I have somewhere else to be. And so part of the dynamic difference between the morning and the evening, and this is a little more about the world of the ancient of late antiquity, is in the morning. One of the reasons we get up so early that we do this first thing is because we only have the daylight hours ahead of us, but you're flush with cash, right? You've got all the time for the day that you need. It's early in the morning, and so if you dawdle a little bit longer, it's okay because you got the whole day ahead of you to make up for it. But in the evening, and Frangela suggested why we have a hard stop in the evening. In the evening, we have a hard stop, and the hard stop is we got to finish because we got to get home. Because it's not safe. It's dark. There are brigands. There are beasts. Right? The evening service is about getting it done to get home. Right? We have the blessing Hashkivenu in there, which is an addition in that evening, but that's all about getting us home safely and letting us get through the night safely because the night is not a safe place to be. That's why we don't read Torah at night, right? Because think about it, like it would make more sense if you're praying during a work day to do your work first and then do your long prayers afterwards, right? Because you've accomplished the tasks of the day and then you pray with the extra time you have afterwards. But that's just not what our culture is. Our culture is we get up, we do these religiously important things first thing in the morning, and then what's left of the day, then we do our work. By the way, that also comes this idea of learning a Torah. Don't say to yourself, I will learn Torah in my spare time. I will learn Torah in my free time. Because you'll never get there. Because something else will always get in the way. You have to, you make the time to learn Torah even before prioritizing your other, maybe more important things in that moment. And the same is true in prayer. In the morning, you get up and you go do your prayers. And we're going to take whatever time it takes to get it done. And then we'll go to work, having fulfilled our sense spiritually that day. This is a little abridged as well because it's reformed, so we abridge some things. But here is the text of Ahava Rabbah from the morning. How deeply, right? Ahava Rabbah, depth, greatness. You have loved us, Adonai, our God, gracing us with surpassing compassion. On account of our forebears, whose trust led you to teach them the laws of life, be gracious to us, teaching us as well. O merciful one, have mercy on us by making us able to understand and discern, to heed, learn, and teach. And Howard, this is for you. And lovingly to observe, perform, and fulfill all that is in your Torah. Enlighten our eyes with your Torah. Focus our minds on your mitzvot. Unite our hearts in love and reverence for your name. Then we will never feel shame, never deserve rebuke, and never stumble. Having trusted in your great and awesome holiness, we shall celebrate your salvation with you. Gather us in peace from the four corners of the earth and lead us upright to our land. For you, O God, work wonders. You chose us. Truly, you drew us near to your great name, that we might acknowledge you, declaring you one in love. Praise be you, Adonai, who chooses your people Israel in love. There's more here. It's not different. It's just more. There's more ideas that come out of this. So what are some of the ideas that come out of Ahava Rabbah that don't come out of Ahavat Olam? Well, let's look at them side by side. On the left is Ahava Rabbah. I took out the last piece about the gathering because the gathering part here, just what I'm talking about. This graph here, the gather us in peace at the bottom, feels a little bit out of kind, right? Because it's not about revelation. It's actually about redemption. It's asking something of God for us for the future. Gather us in this metaphor of us being gathered from the four corners of the earth. This is that notion that we call the ingathering of the exiles, right? We Jews have been dispersed, right? Made a diaspora, put in exile around the world. And we're asking that you, God, you gather us up from the four corners of the earth and bring us back to our land. If we look for a moment, I'm going to pull it back up a second. If we look for a moment at the text of Yotzer from last week, we said the same thing about this line about shining a new light upon Zion, right? That seems like it's out of place. The whole blessing was about the beauty of creation and of light. And then, yes, they use this shine a new light as a metaphor, but it's about getting to Zion. It's this forward-thinking, redemptive goal, tying the beginning of the story to the end of the story. May we get to Zion. And in Ahava Rabbah, same notion. Gather us in peace from the four corners and lead us upright to our land. There's, by the way, a custom. It's a lovely custom. If you are praying the morning tefillah, and if you are wearing talitot, there's a custom of literally gathering in your hand four corners. Which four corners? The four corners of your talit. You grab the four tzitzit and you put them in your hand and you hold them in your left hand during the recitation. You hold them from now through the recitation of Shema and Ve'ahavta and into the Geula, actually. This idea of, and there's a few examples of this where we sort of do a physical representation. We go up on our toes, we say the word Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. We cover our eyes, we say the Shema to give us a deep sense of meditation. We gather the tzitzit in our hand to do this as well. But I would suggest that this is something that the rabbi sort of added in later, looking more at what we're hoping for, isn't really the focus of the show us how you love us piece. So here are the two texts, Ahava Rabbah on the left, Ahavat Olam on the right. Clearly one is longer, but what is in Ahava Rabbah that's not in Ahavat Olam?
Teaching.
Say more, Susan.
Oh, it says, you teach them the laws of life and be gracious to us, teaching us as well. And so,
who's the them in that sentence?
the people.
Our ancestors.
Yeah, so there's two groups of people here. We're the us, but there's a them. And the them, Dan, I think you're right, are our ancestors, right? Our forebears, as this,
yeah.
Our translators, didn't want to use the word ancestors, didn't want to use the word forefathers because it's gendered. So the editors of Mishkan Tefillah chose the word forebears. On account of our forebears, whose trust led you to teach them, right? Our ancestors were so great. You had deep trust in them, and so you taught them. What are we asking? Teach us too. Susan.
Would them be the people who are at Sinai?
So I think it's the people who are at Sinai, but it's really anyone who was in a generation that received revelation, right? The big generation of that obviously is the generation of Sinai, because the majority of the revelation, took place during that generation. But I think this also includes Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. I think this includes Adam and Eve. I think this includes Noah, right? The other times in which God revealed God's self and God spoke to humanity, those are the times when the trust of the people led God to teach them, right? And I think that in this instance, teaching them the laws of life equals revelation, equals you, God, telling them what to do. That's what revelation is. There's something in here that reminds me of the Avot, the Imahot, right? That notion that God, there have been times in our people's history when you were exceedingly gracious and giving and all those things to us. And part of what you promised those awesome generations is that you would continue to treat the later generations like them. And we're here to collect. We are here to ask nicely, respectfully, and justifiably that you fulfill your end of the bargain by continuing to do for us as you promised to our ancestors you would do for us. I had a teacher in rabbinical school who called this audacious covenant theology. Okay. Theology meaning how we think about our relationship with God. Covenant meaning this is the brit, this is the covenant. God promised to Abraham. God promised to Moses. God promised to Noah. Those are the three iterations of the brit, that God would take care of the descendants in various ways. That was the promise that God made. That's the theological relationship we have with God. That's the covenant. The audacity is us calling God's marker. The audacity is us saying to God, God, you owe us. And so it is audacious, but it's grounded. We're justified in doing that. Howard, go ahead.
Negotiation with its own God.
You got to speak up, Howard. We can't. You're on, but we can't hear you very well.
I'm sorry. Are we the only ones who negotiate with our God? Are we the ones? Israel struggles with God. People struggle with their God.
So I think you're mixing metaphors when you say that, because you're not wrong, right? We do have examples of Abraham negotiating with God and with Moses negotiating God, but I don't see this as a negotiation. I don't think we're meant to understand that as a negotiation, right? It's not a negotiation when you say, you owe me $10, please give me the $10. That's not a negotiation. That's a claim. And that's what we're doing here. We're making our claim on the promise that God told us or told our ancestors we are entitled to. It's not audacious to do that to a loan shark. It's not audacious to do that to the state lottery when you have a winning lottery ticket. It's not audacious to do that to your friends who said they're going to do what for you. It's only audacious because it's God. For us to say, who are we to go to God to make a claim? But who are we? We are the descendants of the people who God said, your descendants may make this claim on me. And so,
have to remind, is it important that we remind God in this prayer that you promised the other people that you now have to deliver to us, in case you forgot?
So I'll put that back to you. Is this about reminding God or is it about reminding ourselves?
Probably both.
Probably both. And I think it's more about us, because this is about, we're not making the claim yet that we get all the goodies, right? What we're asking in this moment, in this prayer, is God, be as generous with your wisdom with us that you were with our ancestors. We're not asking for blessings yet. We're not asking for rains in their time or the fields to produce food. We'll get there. But this is just about, God, will you please give us your Torah like you gave it to our ancestors? So even here, we're asking only for the tools to do ourselves, right? We're not asking God to build us a house. We're asking God to provide us with wood and nails and hammers and saws that we can then go and build, right? Yes. Give us mercy, making us able to understand and discern, to heed, to learn, right? We're asking for capability, not that the gift be given to us fully cooked and fully prepared. So,
isn't that why we become partners with God?
Isn't that why we become partners with God? What do you mean by that when you say when
we ask for the tools, and that's God's part of the partnership, and our part of the partnership is we then take those tools and create them into what we need.
So I think I bumped it when you said the word, isn't that the why? I think it's the what. I think it's an application of the fundamental nature of the relationship, right? Which is all about, right? This is the tool of revelation, right? This is that covenant, right? This goes back to the star. God gives us the revelation, the tools to do the things that God wants us to do, and we have to know what they are. We have to be able to understand them. Lo bashamayim hi. It's not up in the heavens that we have to wonder. It's not under the sea. It's right here for us, right? If God puts it before us, if we have the God-given abilities of wisdom and discernment and all those things, then these are doable. And we know that the doing of it is our responsibility. God, your job is to give us the knowledge and the wisdom to understand it. Our job is to put it into practice. That's the covenant.
How do we know we're doing the right job or doing good enough of a job?
Well, Barbara, I'm going to ask you this question. How do we know that we're doing the right job?
I don't know. I mean, if you pray and you do everything and you're pious and you feel that you're doing the right job, how do you know?
You feel loved, Barbara.
You feel loved?
So there are at least two answers to this question, and the two that I'm going to give right now, and there are more. One answer is the one that's fairly traditional. We see it in the prayer that comes next in Shema ve'ahavta, which is basically, we will know because things will go well for us. We will know that we're doing the right thing because the rains will come in their season in the right amount. It'll be dry in the right season. The fields will grow.
Yeah. But what about the book? Why do bad things happen to good people?
So that isn't the name of the book, actually. The name of the book is not Why Do Bad Things Happen to
People? I mean, when
bad things happen, right?
Yeah.
But it's actually really important, right? Because at the end of the book, the answer is,
right? Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So that's why I said there's at least two answers to your question, right? The traditional answer is we will see it through how our experience goes on earth.
Right.
But those of us in this conversation right now, most of us are religiously progressive. And part of religious progressivism is a rejection of that theology, right? Because too many of us know too many people who are good people who've experienced tragedy. Right.
Well,
we know bad people.
There's Job, Rabbi.
There's Job and people in our own lives, right? For getting out of the tradition, like, it's just that doesn't meet with our experience of the world. So then the other answers go like this. There's sort of a middle ground answer, which is, oh, they'll get their reward in the world to come. That works for some people. It's still difficult. Or the third answer is, we don't really know. We don't really know whether or not, but I mean that in a serious way, right? Ours is not to wonder or wait for our reward, right? We do what we think God wants us to do it, and we just do it. And we don't worry about the what happens next. Right? You pray because you pray, not because you think your prayers are going to be answered. You pray for wisdom every day. You pray for peace every day. You pray for healing every day, even if the person doesn't get healed. And even if the world is still amidst in war, you pray anyway. Because it's not actually about effectuating a change. It's about something else. And the something else is cultivating a relationship, maintaining a sense of community. And also, there's the one place where I can be a progressive and be a traditional, which is to say that maybe on a day-to-day, week-to-week, the world isn't going to change. But we are holding out hope, and this will be the conversation next week, that our behavior, our following the mitzvot and doing all those things is going to do what? Bring about Mashiach, bring about the time of redemption. And we won't know that happens until it happens. And it takes faith. That's what faith is. Faith is doing this thing that God asked you to do without seeing the direct result of it from God, because that's not what God has told us is going to happen necessarily. Or not what we believe God is going to make happen necessarily. Margaret.
Well, it all sounds good.
Why we say it twice a day? It sounds good.
Well, what I mean is, we all rationalize. We're human beings.
Sure.
We do things that we may think we're right and we know what we're doing and this is the best thing, but it's not to somebody else or the rest of the world or whatever. So it's like here we are, think we're doing all this stuff that's just we're behaving perfectly and we're going to be redeemed. Well, that's not true. So you never know. So I just think that things happen, just like you said. And that's the way it is. And we all have to do the best we can. And hopefully we're following a right path, but we just all we can do is the best.
There was a Christian monk named Thomas Merton who, and I forget the language that how he wrote it, but he wrote basically this: we don't always know what God wants us to do, but we believe that the fact that we want to do what God wants us to do, the fact that we are compelled to try to please God, in itself pleases God. And that's another point I think, Barbara, you can take, which is that, do we always know we're doing the right thing? No. But if we're oriented towards trying to do the right thing, that's a big accomplishment of it in itself. And we get partial credit.
And what we think is right is not what somebody else thinks is right.
Yeah, and there's big rights and wrongs, and there's little rights and wrongs, right? You know, a little right and wrong is dietary ethic, for example, right? It can't be that terrible, the eating of pork and shellfish, because God doesn't mind other people doing it, right? God doesn't want us to do it, right? But we believe that God said it's okay for other people. Okay, right? That's different than, say, murder. Right? So we have, for example, this notion of the 7 Noahide laws, right? These laws that we believe apply to everybody. And then the laws that don't apply to everybody, like lighting Shabbos candles, or not eating pork or shellfish, or blowing the show, all those specifically Jewish things. So not doing all these laws, it's an abdication of the relationship, but not our humanity in a certain way. We only got a couple of minutes left. And I want to raise... Go ahead, Fran.
I just think tomorrow, or no, actually tonight, the sun sets at 5:53, and I'm going to read that prayer. And tomorrow morning, the day of the inauguration, which everybody's sitting on the edge about, I'm going to read the other side and see what the day is with the whole bit. Scary. I want to see it. There's things that...
So Temple Bethel is a 501c3 organization. We do not endorse candidates for office and have no particular opinion on the outcome of tomorrow's inauguration, except that our national system should go forward without incident. Having said all of that, what's beautiful about this, Fran, actually is what you just suggested, which is we say these blessings on the best days of our life, on the
worst days of our life.
Yes.
Both and. Right? And so if you are a fan of President Trump, you should have said these blessings the day he was inaugurated and the day he leaves office. And if you're not a fan of President Trump, you should have said these blessings on the day he was inaugurated and on the day he leaves office, as an example. It's irrespective of what's going on. There's a couple of occasions in life when we're told we are exempt from doing this, right? When you're in the week of Shiva, on your wedding, there's a couple of days when you don't have to say these, right? Because you're overwhelmed. But otherwise, you got to do these every single day. And what's nice about it is they kind of act a little bit like spiritual counterbalances, right? When you're having a day of the high highs, it reminds you that, you know what, you still have responsibilities. You can't just abandon everything and go celebrate. And on the days of the low lows, listen, God's still here. And we're going to get through this. And this is the way to do it. The question that we haven't answered yet, and I'm going to see if we can answer it in the next 2 minutes, is this blessing is about love. These blessings, I should say, are about love. And they explicate pretty clearly how we understand how God shows love for us. God shows love for us, showed love for us by giving the revelation, and shows love for us by continuing to have it be in front of us, by having created us in such a way that it's understandable to us, that we can discern and heed and learn, right? Our access to revelation is the symbolism of God's love for us. How do we show our love for God?
Mitzvot.
I heard mitzvot. Okay, yes. Are we told that anywhere?
We are.
Where?
Or
Where?
in the prayer. In
Which
the
one?
prayer.
It says by
prayer?
making us able to
In-
understand.
In
And
the. Go ahead.
Yeah. Somebody's beeping.
Andy, turn that off.
This prayer tells us God shows us God's love for us by allowing us to understand what the mitzvot are. We read these words. The next words of our prayer service are the Shema. And then what? Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'odecha. You will love Adonai your God with all your might, with all your soul. How? By doing the mitzvot. We reflect the love back to God. And Howard, here's your answer again. By doing. God shows us love by telling us what to do. We show God love by doing the thing. And that's what brings the love full circle. Ahava rabbah ve'ahavta. They complement each other. And as we'll look at next week, the blessing afterward contemplates a world in which we have fulfilled our responsibility, contemplates a world in which we are moving towards that period of redemption, where God is bringing us into all that good stuff. So, having said all that, I'm going to stop the share and to say to everyone, I look forward to concluding this conversation next week with a conversation about the blessings for redemption.